Rod looked over the holographic display in front of him and pondered what he was reading. "So what does it say we have to do for this mission?" asked Boyari. "Well, from what I'm reading, we have to get inside that castle over there, capture the Duke, and make off with him without the locals catching us," replied Rod. The others all turned and looked at the castle just off in the distance, and marveled at its seemingly impregnable fortifications. I don't think we're going to get in there anytime soon," said Kyler. "Well, certainly not through the front door. But we may be able to sneak our way inside anyways," replied Rod. Boyari snorted. "Bro, we couldn't even Trojan horse our way into there," he muttered. Emma thought deeply about this for a time, and then looked over at Passive, who was sitting nearby, quietly minding his business. He was only there that day because his master was away on business and would be a few weeks before he could log in again. So Passive had permission to wander around and help anyone he could. However, today he seemed a bit more disinterested than usual. She soon turned her attention back to the others. "We have Passive with us. Couldn't we just use him to blow down the front door, charge in, and take the guy we're after?" she asked. Rod frowned. "That's the problem. The way this challenge is set up, the less damage we cause, the more points we get. So if we blow down the front door, or start dumping NPCs to get where we gotta go, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that we'll fall below the points threshold needed to complete the challenge, let alone get a 5-star rating, which is what we're after," he replied. The others stood around quietly and thought about this for several minutes, but couldn't come up with a working solution. After a bit, Mesa shook her head. "It's no wonder everyone's struggling to complete this quest. I mean, with restrictions like that, nobody will ever get a 5-star rating," she muttered. Rod snorted. "Yeah, and it's not like we can go Ninja Creed on this one either. We're set up to do heavy damage. While this requires a level of finesse that we're not rigged for," he replied. Just then Passive perked up. "Does this quest have a time limit?" he asked. Rod checked the instructions, but didn't find anything. "Not from what I can see." "Why do you ask?" he replied. Passive pondered this briefly as he first looked off at the castle, and then up at the sky and the slowly descending sun. A sly grin drew across his face soon after. He then looked back at the others and smiled at them with a whimsically devious grin. "If you lads are interested, I might just have a plan." Rod looked through his binoculars at the distant castle and took in its torch-lit ramparts with careful attention to detail. He eventually grunted. "The little turds have the place lit up with more torches than a Turkish bonfire," he muttered. Kite, who was also looking at the castle, marveled at this. "Yes, they do, which will make capturing the Duke all that much harder. So our next question should be, how do we get in without being seen?" he replied. Rod eventually lowered his binoculars and looked at Kite. "You're our best strategist here. What's your take on this?" he asked. Kite pondered this briefly, and then called up a holographic display. "Based on what I've read in the forums, the soldiers that guard the castle will respond to any change in their environment, no matter how small. That's why getting past even the walls is nearly impossible," he said. Kite's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, and that's our first objective, unfortunately," he replied. "Can't we just sneak ourselves in with a cart or something?" asked Sarah. Boyari snorted slightly. "Fat chance. They're checking everything going in and out of that place with a fine-tooth comb. So we're not going to be able to Trojan horse our way in, just like I said earlier," he replied. Everyone's eyes then turned to Passive. "Well, since it was your idea to do a night assault, what brilliant idea do you have to get past their perimeter?" asked Rod. Passive twitched his ears thoughtfully as he looked off towards the castle. Eventually, he turned his attention back to the team. "I say we poke the beast and see where he roars," he replied. Rod cocked an eyebrow at this. "Poke the beast? Like, throw something at them and get their guard to respond so we can see how they react to local stimuli?" he asked. Passive nodded. "Precisely," he grinned. Rod thought about this briefly and then looked to Kyler. "Hey, you got any of those ice bullets of yours?" he asked. "Yeah, I've got a couple cases." "What did you have in mind?" replied Kyler. "Think you can hit a torch with one at a quarter mile." Kyler chuckled at this. "Do chickens lay eggs?" he quipped. He then summoned one of his sniper rifles, laid down, and then loaded an ice bullet, after which he looked through his scope and took careful aim. A moment later, Kyler's rifle thumped lightly as its silencer expertly hid the report of the rifle. A split second later, one of the torches winked out. Immediately, the local guards, who sat watch around the outside of the castle, leapt up and charged in the direction of the silenced torch. However, upon arriving, they found that it was bathed in a thick sheet of heavy ice. Seeing this, some of the guards stood watch, with swords drawn, while others began to cast disenchantment spells at it which melted the ice and restored the torch to fully working order. Rod looked at the timer on his wrist and was impressed at how fast they responded and resolved the issue. After a few moments, the soldiers returned to their posts and resumed their watch. Interesting, he replied with intrigue. Mesa, however, frowned at this. I'll give them credit. They're fast and know their job well, she muttered. That's NPCs for ya, chuckled Kite. Rod thought about this a bit more and then grinned. All right, I say we poke them again and see what happens. But this time, let's do more of them at once than just a single torch. Kyler, swing east and then take out 2 of them over near that secondary gate, he said. Kyler quickly chambered around, hitting 1 torch, then silenced a second one immediately after. Just as expected, the NPCs responded just like before. However, to their surprise, while trying to deal with the quenched torches, the NPCs left a small hole in their defenses on the ground. However, the guards on the wall remained at their posts. Well, that was unexpected, said Kite. Rod grinned. Yes, it was. However, I think I now have a solution. Well, to the guards on the ground, anyways. The guys on the wall, though, remain a problem, he said. Agreed. Even so, there may be a way to resolve that. Mesa, can you give me a frost spell AoE on the left side of the front door? Said Kite. Mesa smirked incredulously. At this range? Gee, you're not asking much, are you? She quipped. Emma, Sarah, can you buff her so she can get the range and accuracy she needs for her arrow spell? Asked Rod. On it, replied both girls. Mesa soon pulled an arrow from her quiver, cast a frost spell on it as Emma and Sarah cast buffs on her, took aim, and then fired. The arrow arched high through the sky as silent as midnight, and then impacted the wall of the castle just to the left of the main door. Immediately the frost spell erupted, sending ice down the side of castle in both directions, winking out torches one right after another. The soldiers around the outside of the castle immediately rallied to the torches and began to restore them one at a time. However, as they did, they left a large, open, unattended gap in the defenses. Rod grinned. Do it again, but to the left of where you just hit, he said. Mesa repeated her arrow shot, extinguishing even more torches and drawing away even more soldiers. However, much to their surprise, one of the castle's side doors opened up, and soldiers began to pour out into the surrounding land where they quickly filled in every single gap in the defenses. Rod muttered angrily at this as he watched all their hard work quickly erased. Well, that didn't work, he muttered. All right, so what now? Asked Mesa. Everyone then turned their attention to Passive to see what he would suggest. However, to their complete surprise, he was nowhere to be found. Passive? Passive, where'd you go? They cried after him, but in quiet voices. A moment later, Passive emerged out of the bushes holding the tied and bound Duke, the target of their side quest, over his head. He then grinned at them as they looked on in shock and surprise. I believe this is the target you were looking to acquire. Am I correct? He said with a grin. Everyone's jaws dropped open in surprise. Dude, when did? How? Asked Boyari in surprise. Kyler laughed at this. I think the little dude used our experimenting as a distraction and snuck into the castle to snag our target and bring him here, he replied. Rod laughed at this. Bro, we need to buy you a steak dinner when we get back, he chuckled. Passive nodded in appreciation. Such a gift is most welcome, he replied. Kite shook his head at this and laughed. All that work, and all we'll get out of it is a participation trophy, he chuckled. Yeah, and bragging rights for being the first ones to beat this stupid quest, even if the dog did most of the work, replied Boyari with a grin. A win is a win, is it not? Replied Passive with a grin. The others laugh. That it is, said Rod. Just then the Duke, who Passive was holding, began to squirm and whine as though he wanted to speak. Curious to see what the Duke had to say, Rod removed his gag. So what is it that you're so desperate to tell us? He asked. The dude looked over at him with tears in his eyes and said, "If you will permit me, dear sirs, I really, really need to pee."